Okay, welcome back to the part 2 in the Volkswagen Jetta reinstall stage. So the part 1 was how to remove the Volkswagen Jetta headliner out of the car, and in this part 2 of the series we're going to show you how to reinstall the board back in once it's recovered, or if you're doing an exchange or repair, whatever suits you. But this will show you guys how to put it back in. So you got to give it an initial flex to get it those two rear wings inside the vehicle, so a slight bit of flex and bow into the headlining was required there. So that does start to slight crease the board a bit, but you want to keep that very minimal. So lay that blanket, make sure you had that blanket laid in the front section, so over the front two seats and the console, because you want to try to protect the console as much as possible, because that's where the headliner is dragging. And if you didn't have that blanket laying there, well then you got to apply more flex to the board to try to keep it away from all the trim and the interior. So yeah, we used our foot before just to keep it off the ground and keep it away from the door trim itself. You want to try to prevent the headlining board from touching the front dashboard and the console there. So it probably would have been more ideal to have a blanket as well laying at the front section too if you're unexperienced in this, but we have got the material wrapped around the front and the rear and all the edges as well, so it's actually padded the roof lining up a lot. So even if it was to touch the car, it's not going to mark it at all, because we've actually overlapped all the brand new material. So you can see how we gave it that last flex just to get it over the raised center console. And yeah, the job's in location now. So we find that these exact Volkswagen Passats or Jettas are very difficult and reinforced boards to flex and bow out of the car. So you're going to have trouble getting these ones in and out. Just keep that in mind. It's kind of expected. But you can see it went in really nice. The board didn't break or bow or split. And you just got to try to limit the amount of flex you give these boards. But that's in position, laying on the back seat now, ready to just give it a quick scan over and to lift up and install into location. So you want to focus on what you're going to be doing with the sun visors here before you lift it up. And a couple of options: you can either position the sun visors into place now, and that would be what we're doing today. So we're going to position the sun visor, lock it into place with that little tongue there, and then grab that little black bracket piece that goes behind the sun visor itself, and that kind of locks the sun visor onto the headliner board and positions it all correctly. Then you can plug up those two wires, and then it's all ready to be pushed up into location. And if the headliner board goes up into location nice and good and it's all lined up, you can then just plug in that little clip. It'll just kind of like just push up straight away, and then you can just put your screw through, and that's it. If it all lines up. So there's another option you can do is basically you leave the sun visor off for now, and that black clip that is visible on the underneath side that we just plugged in, then that would be still in the roof, or you can plug it back into the roof. And then as you go to lift the whole headlining board up, you can then grab that wiring harness, kind of put your fingertips behind the headliner board itself, and try to feed that wiring harness basically through the black clip and have it hanging out on the visible side, so on the side that you're looking at. And then once it's all into place, then you can plug the wiring harness to the sun visor and then load the sun visor in. So there's a couple of options you can do there. So yeah, the one that we did today is basically put the sun visor and clip it all together now, and then hopefully everything lines up when we go to lift the board up into place. So definitely much more involved than just say a usual Commodore or a Falcon, where all you got to do is put the roof lining back up, put a screw in, and you're done. So so much more involved in the Volkswagens or most European makes and all those type of things. So yeah, these ones can be quite fiddly, especially with the car that we're working on today, because it has got those little metal brackets that are in where the screws have got to go through, and sometimes those little rectangle metal brackets, little tabs, kind of fall out of place when you go to push it up and load in the screws into position. So what we're doing now is just lifting the board straight up, and you kind of like, you could almost position the board right now as you go under the A-pillars and then bring it forward. So that's a pretty good way to just you know, load the board into place on these cars. So we basically just push it directly straight up, flex the A-pillars in if you have to, or you can just kind of like position it so the board goes straight under the A-pillar. We have got the little microphone cord there, so we just got to position it correctly so the cord hangs out nice and good for that little microphone for the radio there. But once that's in place, you're pretty much lined up the front now, and we the rear C-pillar section, that we'll come to that later on. Here we can just push in the headlining underneath the B-pillars, and see that slight crease we got in the headliner board right there. No stress about that, because I'll show you ways of getting that out anyway, which would involve just leaving it sometimes the car parked out in the sun, and as the car warms up, the foam and fabric will just expand, and any creases and imperfections in the board itself will just flex or just slowly dissolve themselves out. You can also use things like a steamer as well. If you're just make sure you test on small sections before you go ahead and use the steamer. Watch out for your settings as well. It's like a handheld steamer, because you could say penetrate or damage the glue behind the material. So, but a steamer works great if you know exactly what you're doing there. I think the Phillips, the handheld little Phillips one, the steamer, that's really good as well. So Steam and Go, I believe it's called. And also you can use like an upholstery skewer as well to pull out any imperfections in the and creases and dents in the actual material itself. So we're not too concerned with creases or anything in the actual board itself, because that's pretty much just from flexing the board into position anyway. So we've got pretty much got the A-pillars all in position, the board's underneath it as well. We got the B-pillars now, just finishing off the last B-pillar on the passenger side. Just slightly flexing it under and making sure it goes under nice and neat, and also lined up as well. So the front and the rear, there's no gaps as well. So you want to make sure the board's all lined up before we even start to put any plastics back on, because if you start screwing things in now and the board's not lined up, you're pretty much just asking for issues. So you want to also make sure that the seal is sitting nice and flush on the board as well. So that's why we're running our hands along at the front edge here. You want to make sure that the headliner board's sitting underneath the seal all nice and neat, so it gives off a clean finish where it's got to be positioned. And you can see the rear section needs a bit of attention as well, so we just hop in the car, or you can go around to the back side as well, and then just want to position that all underneath the seal as well. Sometimes from my experience, there is a slight gap on where the B-pillar meets the headliner, and that's pretty much just usual on most Volkswagens, on Golfs, and these ones that we're working on today. So you can say, to plan for that and avoid it, maybe you could almost make the material slightly hang away from the B-pillar itself when you go to wrap it on the headliner, so you have enough material just to slightly close the gap. We will end up closing the gap anyway, but just by trying to lift the B-pillar slightly more up and then position the headliner, so it'll be a very minimal gap anyway. Just thought that I'll bring that to your attention. With the front here, you want to be lining up that big tab there, the big plastic tab. It's like a little cylinder. You want to line them up. They're your locators for the front. So you want to position them into location correctly, because if you go to push that front section up and they're not in position properly, you could end up snapping them or breaking them off completely. So you just want to make sure that everything's roughly lined up before you start putting in some screws, because because we left those little metal brackets and those little metal tabs in the car itself, it's going to be hard to line up those screws. But the only other option would be to have them out of the car or replace them completely. So we forgot to cut out the little sun visor clip here right now, so we're just going to go ahead and do that. Just make enough for the sun visor clip to go in, and obviously you would have to be really gentle here, because you wouldn't want to make any mistakes where you cut too much of the material, because you've gone so far already, and if you cut too much, you're going to basically end up you'd have to come up with a solution to pretty much avoid seeing any of the extra cuts on the material itself. So you can do that with a razor blade. I find it's pretty much easy with just a pair of scissors that are nice and sharp. But yeah, ideally you'd want to probably be doing that before the board goes in, but we must have forgot today, so we're just gonna do it in the car. And once we've done that, yeah, we'll just go ahead and pretty much start to put in the plastic components like the grab handles and the sun visor clips. You can see here, guys, how the color match was really nice and perfect to those sun visors and the actual A-pillars itself. So that was a good match today. If you're looking for the material to purchase for these ones with the Volkswagens, majority of the time we use the number 6 light oyster material, but also some of these Volkswagens do come out with a thorny type of color. It's like, so we can use our thorn, which will be, I believe it will be our number 8 material that we will start to list as well on our sales page. So other Volkswagen materials can be our number 7 cappuccino light grey, and also it could be the black shadow grey that they came out in, which is the anthracite, and that is our number 5 material. So yeah, so we're just loading up those sun visor clips now and kind of holding them in position and really just hoping for the best that that bracket behind it, that little metal bracket that you can see just there where the screw goes into, so we're kind of looking and seeing if we position the screw correctly, and if it all goes well, you can basically just start screwing in that screw straight to that little metal tab that can fall out really easy. And if it's lined up perfectly, you can even put a bit of spray like a CRC spray or silicone spray on the screw itself, just to make it sure that it goes in nice and easy. So we're going to start screwing that. As soon as you start, you want to kind of finish the process, because you've lifted the screw up now and it's touched that metal tab, and if you were to reposition the screw, you could make that little metal tab itself fall out of location. So I like removing and installing all screws on these cars by hand rather than just using the power drills. That way you can just feel the tension on the screw itself. So once that's all done up nice and tight, you would feel it grip and grab basically that little metal nut tab thing that you got screwing into anyway. So once it's gripped that, you'll feel it get tight and bring the board nice and tight to the car. And then, yeah, all good news, it's all done and ready. So that one went in, and basically you just want to try to get all 4 screws go in nice and good. So that would be including the 2 sun visor clips and the 2 sun visors themselves. Because if one doesn't go in and the little nut falls out, sometimes you might have to get behind where I'm sitting now and just look behind the headliner board and see if the tab has fallen out of place, and you might have to feed your hands and fingertips into it and just try to push that little tab back into the location. So yeah, they can be quite time consuming little process if they are those little tabs are falling out where the screw's got to go into, because I think there is a method and a way of reassembling those whole brackets on the headliner board itself before the headliner board goes up. So say it would be almost like the grab handles are installed and the sun visors are installed onto the headliner board before it goes into the car, and all you've got to do is just push all those clips into location. That is one method of how you can reinstall these plastics, but I think with that method you're going to have to basically replace all those little metal clips, because trying to get them out of location where they are is you can damage them, and if they're damaged they're not going to function correctly. And most of these cars come out with those side airbags, and you know, if the metal clips not positioned correctly, when say if the airbags were to go off, you could have problems with the plastics basically busting off, or the grab handles busting off, you know. So ideally I like this method where you just you know, as long as you position the plastics and the components all correctly, you should have no drama with that screw going straight through where they got to go through the plastic and into that little metal tab bracket that's behind. And if they do fall out, yeah, you just flex the headliner board away and readjust the situation, readjust that little metal tab and put it back into location, and then go ahead and do it again. But yeah, if you're just following the steps that we show you today, pretty much we don't touch those little metal brackets at all. Leave them in the exact position that they were when the board came out. And because you haven't touched them, they all should line up when the new board goes back in, or say once it's recovered and it goes back in, it should all just line up. And then you just coat those little screws that you put them back in with a bit of CRC or a silicone spray, just so they glide right in. Position the plastic correctly just before you start. Have a peek behind the board like we're doing here, so we can make sure that little metal tab's in position. So we had a little screwdriver then, and we just a little flathead screwdriver, and we basically popped popped the board down a bit so we could see right behind, and we kind of moved the tab into position where it's got to be, so the screw can go straight up into the little hole in the little tab itself, like the little the nut itself. And as long as it pushes up there with nice and good tension, and you just hold that tension so the tab doesn't come out, and then you just start screwing, you should be fine, and it'll go up nice and tight. And yeah, so but if they fall out of place, that's what you got to do. You just gotta, that's what I do anyway, just peel the board down a bit so you can have a peek behind the board, make sure that it hasn't fallen out of location of where it's got to go. So yeah, very much more fiddly and time consuming than just the usual Holdens and Fords anyway. But you can see here, see how that tab's in location. If you just push that board up, that screw is going to line up exactly with the center of that little tab, that little screw. And yeah, that's how you do these cars. I like to do the sun visors first, because if the sun visors are all lined up and they all go in perfectly, and I haven't budged the grab handle little metal tabs behind the grab handles themselves, everything should line up really nice and neat. So yeah, I like to start with the hardest ones first, and I find the hardest ones to put in would be the sun visors. But yeah, this is doing it this way though. There are a couple of other ways you can go about doing it. So this is more or less the way of I guess not replacing those little metal clips, because yeah, taking them out you could damage them, and if you damage them you got to replace them. So yeah, so as long as you just take your time, do it all correctly, it should be all fine. And what we can do here as well, we can just push that front edge up nice and good and tight, because there's a couple of little plugs behind the that little metal that little black bracket that we loaded up on the sun visor itself, where it has a little metal clip on it, and you want to push it into location into the actual roof itself. So sometimes, even though you've done the screw up, you haven't pushed that into location, so you want to do that first. Now we're going to move on to the grab handles themselves. So the grab handles have a couple of locators, and it's where like that little plastic feeds in, and I like to put these in before the screws. So don't put the screws in yet, you just want to plug it into location so it kind of grips itself, because if you put the screw in say like that, and then you plug in the grab handle itself, the little screw might push the little tab out of place. So get it all located first, all pushed in and aligned, and then put the screws in. And you can see here that they went in really nice and easy. We just did it in one shot. You kind of want to do it in one shot, because as soon as that little screw goes through, you're going to push the little tab out of place. And yeah, if you take the screw back out, you may potentially that little metal tab might fall out of place and fall inside the roof lining, or the inside of the actual roof itself. So try to do it in one shot like we just did then, and you shouldn't have any dramas at all. Yeah, so we can move ahead and do all the other grab handles now. Okay, so we've done the passenger side. Now we're coming to the driver's side, and the difficult part about the driver's side, as you can see right here, is very hard to actually position yourself so you can look behind the headliner itself at where the screw's going in, because the steering wheel's in the way, and there's not much room on the dashboard, or because the steering wheel's in the way. And yeah, so it's very hard to get in there and look. So you're kind of doing it by feel. A bit of arching and flexing in the body and the back there just to try to see what's going on. But yeah, that's what makes the driver's side quite difficult to do. But yeah, you kind of, as long as you got the passenger side all lined up, you'd assume that the driver's side is going to be lined up anyway. So that's why it's probably sometimes better to do the passenger side, because yeah, if that's all lined up and that was the easiest side to do than the driver's side, you should have no dramas doing the driver's side itself. So yeah, I'm able to get in there and just have a quick peek, but yeah, that may be quite difficult to do. The joys of doing these cars, but yeah, there's not much room to sometimes move around and position yourself. But hey, we got it, so let's move on, and we can finish off and make sure that's all nice and flush as well. Push it in, make sure it's all seated correctly, there's no gaps, there's no it's all pushed up nice and tight. that little harness there, once you plug it in, that little wiring clip there, that will power the whole headlining itself. So that's when you can, once that's plugged in, you can check your sun visor lights and make sure that everything's working. Because if you pinched the wire at all during, say, the installation of the sun visors, say you put the screw in and you've like damaged the wire, well then you're going to earth the system. So it's always good idea just to check the lights after you finish installing those sun visors, just to make sure that everything's working correctly. So we went ahead and finished off all the grab handles. They're all done now. Now we just want to focus on that front sunglasses console. So you want to grab that outer plastic surround and push it nice and good into location. So the left and right both have like a little clip, and you want to just push them into location just to get it all lined up, ready for the screws to go in. And yeah, sometimes if it sits in okay by itself, that's good. So we just start by using those 2 screws up the front. We're just using a flathead here, but they are actually normally a Phillips head screw, or they can be most likely like a T15 Torx head screw bit, I believe. But yeah, the flathead's just doing the job for now. And yeah, so once they all line up and go in, we can move ahead and do the 2 at the back. The 2 at the back have got the little metal tab bracket type of thing behind it as well, what we've been working with on the sun visors and the grab handles. So you've got to obviously make sure that that little metal tab doesn't fall out of place as well, because if it does, you would have to probably get in there and line it back up again, maybe even take off that plastic unit that we're actually putting back on. So go ahead and do that. And that would also probably be that T20 Torx head screw. So I think what we're doing right now is we're just actually going to get in there with a flathead and just push the bracket over a bit, just to align where the screw's going in, because there might be a slight you know, where it's not lining up, so maybe it's shifted at some point during the removal stage. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. Once you whack those 2 screws in, we're going to proceed to the next section, which is putting all the units back onto the sunglasses console itself. So these ones, this whole car is usually probably ideally booked in for 2 days, to be honest, because but we get them done in 1 day, and sometimes we like to give that time overnight just to let the fabric settle before handover to the customer. But yeah, I'd probably I would say that a good 6 to 9 hours that these jobs take. That allows for plenty of time to, if there's any mistakes or anything that needs to be you know, tidied up, it can happen as well. But it's just an idea of a turnaround time maybe for these ones. So you just want to plug in that unit, that front piece now. They're quite easy. Just make sure the wires and the harnesses go all back to the way they were. The front section is going to require 2 more screws to hold it up, so you want to put those in now, and then yeah, go ahead and finish the rest of it off. So after that, you just want to grab the sunglasses console itself and push that shelf into place. So here's a bit of a location at the back of it where you just want to load it up, line it up, and then push it straight up, and those 2 clips hold it up at the front. And make sure that it all operates correctly, and then put the middle piece back in. So line those tongues up, and they just slide straight in. Those little plastic tabs that are on that unit can get quite brittle and break as well. So if they do, and the unit doesn't want to sit properly, you could probably use like a double-sided tape or a Velcro. Because this one's got the sunroof, you want to go ahead now and just push all those little metal tabs that are on the sunroof going around the whole thing into location. You can grab your fingertips holding down on the outside of the frame and then pushing the headlining towards the frame, so you're kind of squishing the 2 together to make it come nice and tight. We have noticed that this sunroof shade panel has a loose plastic on the front of it. That shade panel itself is actually quite loose, and that was actually loose before we started, and pretty much it's just because it's exposed to a lot of sunlight, and probably the clips on it have perished over time. But we didn't recover the sunroof shade panel. We just color matched to it because it wasn't sagging. Most sunroofs don't sag straight away. They actually last a bit longer than the actual headlining itself. I'm not sure why. Maybe they're more insulated, or because of the metal piece, but from my experience they actually get quite warm, you know, because they've got the glass window that allows the sun to beam down straight on the panel. But yeah, for some reason they do last longer than the headliners usually. So it was in good condition, and the customer decided to just leave the sunroof alone. We just color matched the headlining to it. And you can when you're pushing that headlining up, when you're like, you know, pushing it up nice and tight and you're hammering away at it sort of thing with your fist or your hands, just be careful that you don't dent the outside of the headlining board itself. So what I mean by this is, as you're pushing with your palms and your fingertips or your fist, you might dent the actual headlining board itself. So you just want to try to prevent that. You don't want to push in a nice even type of way. So yeah. So now we can proceed to the back C section as well and just finish all that off, and then we'll be done. So we just want to take those little plastic Christmas tree type of plugs off using the little trim removal tool, getting behind it, and just load them back into position on the actual C-pillars itself, and because that will help lock in the C-pillar when it gets pushed back on. So you want to make sure that all those clips on the actual back of the C-pillar are off the car and back on the C-pillar ready to be pushed in. Then we're going to put all the screws where they all have to go to finish it all off. And yeah, that's you probably would have seen on the removal part 1 of this video about what was involved in taking them off. So yeah, basically we're just doing the opposite now of what was involved in the on the removal. So we just put those that one screw either side, left and right, finish that off, and you can move the back seat slightly forward, that way you can get the drill at the back there. It might fit in easier, or you can just do it by hand, like a little handheld type of little screw bit, and that will do the job too. So we'll just show you how to put those C-pillars into location. So you want to push it down so it feeds underneath that little plastic piece down the bottom. Just use a flathead screwdriver just to lever the plastics and position it correctly. The door seal has to sit over the top, so you want the C-pillar to go underneath that little door seal that's on the outside. Once it's all in position, see that little metal screw there? Well, you want to take that out and you want to have that on you before you go to push the C-pillar back into place, because that's what gets put in right at the end. And I like to put a bit of glue tack on it as well, just to hold it onto the screw bit, because if it falls off your screw gun, it will just fall into the C-pillar, and then you have to take the C-pillar off again. So make sure you use like a really good magnetic piece, or if they don't really work that well, sometimes they have you know, they can still fall off quite easily. I like to use a bit of glue tack or even a bit of 3N double-sided tape just to hold the screw to the screw gun, to the screwdriver while you're putting the screw in. So we'll show you what happens when it falls off inside and you just got to take off the C-pillar again. But only you know, push that C-pillar in like really tight once you know everything's lined up. And once it is, you kind of want to put a lot of force on pushing the C-pillar. I think it's more or less like towards the rear of the rear window there, like we're doing now, and then hold it with a lot of force, because then that will line up the screw. Because for some reason that normally the screws don't line up to where they got to go in the hole, and you got to kind of like push the C-pillar really far back and hold it there while you're putting that screw in. So we'll show you right now that, see how it's fallen in. It just fell off the drill bit. So then in order to get it out again, you got to take off the C-pillar, and it would have fallen right in that little box chamber that's behind the C-pillar itself, and then just take it out again and then got to start over again. That's why I like to let you guys know that that can happen, and just try to avoid that by using like a really good magnetic piece or a bit of glue tack maybe on the end of the screw bit. Okay, so we got it all in location again, back in to where it's got to go. That rear C pillar section right at the far back where against the window, you want to line that up as well. There's a couple of little clips that it pushes in. You can kind of flex out the back section just so you can see what's going on. Like that, you can see what's going on, and just make sure that you might have to push it, like try to push it backwards to get it into location. But you will feel once it goes into location, you can feel what's in the way and why it's not lining up. Just obviously you don't want to be smashing the rear C-pillar like that if it's not lined up. So you only want to do it once it's lined up, so that way you can get it in one shot. See how it's like very loose at the far back there? That's because one of those clips on this C-pillar on the passenger side was slightly damaged, I think, and or it was just quite loose. It wasn't really holding it nice and tight. The driver's side was working really well, but the passenger side was slightly loose. So but yeah, that all went in really well. We're going to tidy it up as well, give it a good clean over, clean up those seals, those dirty seals, just make the presentation nice and clean and good. We got to put that screw back in now on the C-pillar to finish it off, and yeah, we'll go ahead and proceed to the next step, which is you got to make sure that you don't forget to put all those screws back in along the back section there. So line all those up and put all those back in, and that will hold that rear section up. And that little rear panel needs all those clips back into location as well on the panel itself before you push it up. Those little metal tabs, make sure that they're all back in there. Line it all up, and once it's all lined up, you can push it directly up forward with a slight bit of pressure, and they will go up nice and good. You just want to make sure that they're all lined up before you push them in, because you don't want to break any of those tabs. I like to start in the middle and then work your way out towards the outside. I find that's quite easy to do. And that needs a bit of a tidy up as well. We're going to give that a bit of a clean up as well. Once it's in there, there's a slight little mark on it that hopefully we can get off. The pillars were a bit dirty on this car anyway, so we have gave them a bit of a clean before we installed them, and some little dirt marks just ain't coming off. So we've got that little piece, that little screw bit stuck to the end of the drill bit, that way it doesn't fall off inside. See how we putting a bit of pressure towards the rear of the C-pillar to line up that screw. We just used our palm and applied a bit of pressure backwards and towards the rear window. That way that screw can go in there nice and good and line up perfectly. So yeah, just keep that in mind. That's an important tip sometimes, to line up that screw. So to finish this one off, I like to park the car out in the sun. That way the car can warm up and the fabric can expand and help the situation with giving it a good clean and tidy appearance right at the end. So we're just going around with the upholstery skewer now and just poking at the material and slightly tidying up. So basically getting behind the little foam cells and just bringing them out is a bit of a little tedious type of job, and you want to make sure that you don't actually pull the stitching itself, like slip and pull the stitching, because you end up just making a really mess of the material. So you want to practice probably on a spare piece of material while you're doing this. But yeah, it's a great little tip just to really bring up the tidy appearance. So we're just going to be at this for a bit and just tidy it up, and we'll show you what it looks like right at the end. So just doing a tiny bit more at the front there as well, and just just taking our time, just making sure it looks good. Rubbing as well, that creates a bit of friction, a bit of warmth, and allows the foam kind of to expand. That always helps as well. That's another tip. You can also use a steamer if your settings are correct on the steamer, and maybe even just trial that out on a small section as well, because it can potentially affect the glue behind it, so you don't want to be too much with the steamer. But yeah, go ahead and just tidy it all up with those tips and those tricks that we've just shown you guys, and I'll show you what it looks like right at the end. Okay, let's look at the finished project. So this was the Volkswagen Jetta, and yeah, hopefully you stayed along the way and enjoyed this content and found it really helpful. Hopefully it was the most in-depth coverage you've guys seen on how to remove and recover and install one of these Volkswagen Jettas. The recovery stages are kind of like universal, and they're explained in a couple of our videos on YouTube itself. And yeah, this one's turned out really good. We're just going to give it a bit more of a tidy up, clean those seals up as well. They look a bit dusty and white. The lights all work really good. The colors matched up perfectly. Everything's working really well. The back rear C section right in the middle, there was a slight imperfection in the board itself, which we tried to sand out as we explained earlier on. But that turned out pretty good. That wasn't a really big issue, and we know it's going to look better and better as the car warms up. So we're about to lock the doors, keep the windows up, and let it sit there and bake in the sun, and that will give off even a more cleaner, tidier appearance and ready for handover. So overall it turned out really good. Let me know what you guys think in the comment below, and give this video a thumbs up. Click that subscribe button if you haven't already to help our channel grow. And hopefully you found this content really helpful, guys. And all the recommended products that we use will be provided in the description below on this video, so make sure you check that one out. But yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Catch ya.